Our moment-by-moment coverage of former President Trump's New York criminal trial continues this hour. Right now, Trump's defense team is cross-examining the prosecution's first witness, former tabloid publisher David Pecker. Now, his testimony has focused on a, quote, catch-and-kill scheme to bury stories about Trump. But he has also revealed negative stories about other celebrities and politicians as well. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Compagno, and also joining us today, co-host of The Bottom Line on Fox Business, Dagan McDowell, Fox News contributor and president of American Spirit Enterprises, Tammy Bruce, and Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and former speechwriter to President George W. Bush, Mark Thiessen. And we also have with us the amazing Kara Frederick from the Heritage Foundation. Now, first, let's go live to Eric Shawn. He's outside the New York State Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan. Eric.
Hello, Emily and everybody. Well, you know, this prosecution case rests largely on the theory that former President Donald Trump wanted to buy the stories of women who said that they had sex with him. Well, when it comes to Kara McDougal, something new happened here this morning. David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, revealed in court under cross-examination that no, the former president did not want to buy McDougal's story. That part of what's going on right now, David Pecker back on the stand in the cross-examination by Trump attorney Emile Beauvais. Beauvais trying to show the holes in the prosecution's case. Pecker, who's the former president's friend and former publisher of the National Enquirer, has been describing how he and Trump fixer Michael Cohen arranged to buy the negative stories that could hurt Trump and his presidential campaign back in 2016. He paid $150,000 to buy the rights to former Playboy playmate Kara McDougal's claim that she had a nearly year-long affair with Trump. But Pecker testified that Trump did not want to purchase that story, didn't want it to go through, because he said Trump told him the news always gets out. In the cross-examination by Trump lawyer Emile Beauvais, Beauvais is trying to show that if Trump did not want Pecker to buy McDougal's story, why would he be prosecuted for allegedly orchestrating an election interference scheme to do just that? Pecker said he and Trump had swapped salacious stories and tips for years and killed them for decades. Beauvais trying to establish that buying McDougal's story to bury it was just routine and not prompted or connected to the campaign. Yesterday, Pecker testified that the Enquirer published negative stories, trashing Trump opponents like Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and Ben Carson. But today he admitted those articles were not new, that they had appeared and, in some cases, been taken from other publications. And Pecker also said he bought stories to kill about alleged affairs from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tiger Woods, and Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, among others. So when Kara McDougal came knocking, wanting the money to for her story, really was, he said, to restart her career, because it would let her write articles and appear on magazine covers. And in fact, Pecker today said that she did appear on the cover of Men's Journal, one of the publications he owned, and that, in fact, she did not want her story told. So the big question here is concerning the prosecution's case. Prosecutor Manhattan District Attorney Avram Bragg has said that the former president orchestrated this campaign connected to the election. But so far, at least with the first witness so far, there has been no direct evidence at all that former President Trump told David Pecker to kill any of those stories connected to his campaign. He has just testified that the former president was angry when the information got out, but never claimed at all that that was connected in any way to the presidential election back in 2016, that undercutting the prosecution's case. Emily, back to you.
Eric Shawn, thank you so much. And let's now bring in constitutional law expert and George Washington University professor, Jonathan Turley. So break that down, sir, a little further for us. What does all that mean?
Well, it's a breakdown in the courtroom. They have a witness who is disassembling in front of them. You know, the prosecution never revealed to the jury in the direct that Pecker actually had killed stories for other celebrities, that he had been working on stories 2 decades before the election with Trump that he was suppressing. And now it's only getting worse. Yesterday was really bad in terms of the cross-examination for the prosecution. today is much worse. I mean, here Pecker is saying that Trump didn't want to purchase the story. Yesterday he said that when he asked Trump about reimbursing Cohen, he said he didn't know anything about that. I mean, what we've already been complaining about is the lack of any cognizable crime here, but there's also a dwindling connection to Donald Trump himself. That is, what we're really seeing here is a lot of discussions with Michael Cohen, who's going to give us a really memorable moment when he gets on the stand. He's actually going to look at that jury and say, basically, put my former client in jail for following my legal advice.
And Jonathan, at the end of the day, the burden is on the prosecution, to your point, to bring this to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And my question for you is, as of now, have they met their burden? And is it they that are failing at presenting, or is it that defense is doing a really good job of showing the holes?
I think the defense is doing a very good job, but I have to say this is collapsing on its own weight. I mean, you just have to stand back and let it fall. I mean, just asking simple questions that the jury would want to know has left serious damage for the prosecution. I mean, these are not strange tangential questions. These are the questions that you would have expected the prosecution to ask as just the completion of their line of questioning. Like, was Trump the only one you did this for? When did you start to do this? Now, unless he was trying to get Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tiger Woods elected president, and one of them couldn't be, then the prosecution theory is really becoming something that's easy to mock. I mean, what I just don't understand is how the judge could let this farce unfold in a courtroom, because at the end of the day, he's got to give instructions to this jury. How is he going to instruct them? Because there is no crime. Is he going to say that this was a federal election crime? Because it wasn't. And the federal government declined to charge. Trump wasn't even asked to pay a civil fine. So how is he going to give that instruction? But if it's not a crime, what are we doing here?
That's absolutely right. I think many Americans, frankly, have that same question. Jonathan Turley, thank you so much for joining us today. Bringing this back down to the couch, Mark Thiessen, let's start with you. So to Jonathan's point, you know, bigger cases have been overturned and certainly met their challenges on the basis of one erroneous jury instruction. At the end of the day, if the instructions are not even sure what they're saying, perhaps a lot of people have these same questions that are watching this now.
Well, what's fascinating is this week may end up being a turning point in the election, because Donald Trump may come out of this week with qualified immunity from the Supreme Court and an acquittal in this first trial, which would be quite a stunning event. But, you know, I mean, it seems like the prosecution's case is falling apart, but why is he even being prosecuted to begin with? I mean, he's being accused of suppressing a negative news story. If that was a crime, every campaign press secretary in America would be prosecuted. I mean, if we're going to prosecute him, why don't we prosecute Bill Clinton for suppressing bimbo eruptions? Remember the bimbo eruptions under Bill Clinton? He didn't pay them off. You know what he did? He hired teams of lawyers to comb through their histories and their sex lives and paint them as sluts and bimbos who were uncredible and making accusations of him. Why don't we prosecute Joe Biden for the suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was a much more serious thing, and he lied about it by saying that it was Russian collusion, Russian disinformation, and conspired with the FBI and social media companies to suppress that. Why is that not a crime if this is a crime?
Yeah, I love the idea of you being a DA, Mark. You have my vote for all those. I'm on board with that. Kara, what do you make of this?
Well, I can tell you exactly why he's in that courtroom and why he's being prosecuted, because it's political. Because Alvin Bragg, because Letitia James, they all ran on the promise to get Trump in no uncertain terms.
Yep.
And then I keep coming back. There's a February 2024 NBC poll which talks about how Trump is ahead when it comes to registered voters. But if Trump were convicted of a felony this year, Biden then narrowly pulls ahead when it comes to a favorite in the general election. So that is why he's in the courtroom.
Yep.
And do you think that just in the last 8 days that there's been any change in that sway, in that public opinion? Do you see people congealing more, seeing that this is a mockery of the criminal justice system? Do you see them digging in? What do you see, Dagan?
Something jumped out at me. I think it was Jonna Spilbor who said yesterday, and it's something that has been repeated over and over again, but she said, this is a criminal trial and there's no criminal evidence as of yet. What law did President Trump break? And so, and this is just me thinking out loud, this goes beyond Alvin Bragg, because Matthew Colangelo, who left his job as the #3 at the Justice Department, gave the opening statement. This goes to the muckety-mucks in the Democrat Party. This goes to the White House. This goes to the Biden campaign to keep President Trump front and center in a courtroom. This is a much bigger political play, if you will, and a miscarriage and abuse of the justice system than just one Manhattan district attorney. The revelation about that David Pecker, the catch and kill, suppressing bad stories, neither of which are crimes for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tiger Woods and Rahm Emanuel, that goes straight to those are not crimes. So what are the crimes? What are the felonies? What is the underlying? There is none. If it was about the election, the payments were made in 2017. The election was in 2016. That needs to be hammered home by the defense in the days to come.
Yeah, you know, I think that with all of this discussion, Americans, certainly our viewers, are learning about the importance of an objective point of view when it comes to what's happening legally. You get it from Mark, you get it from Turley, you get it from Andy McCarthy. And there's despite what they might think of Donald Trump, there's an importance to the nature of what is happening here. And it's not just a theory that, or it's a fun thing to say it's a banana republic. This is exactly what happens in banana republics. Sometimes they actually even find a crime. It's amazing to me that they haven't found a crime for Donald Trump, but they haven't. And I think that the larger issue also is that Americans do see this for what it is, which is why his approval has gone up. And I would doubt a bit that poll when you're being asked by a person about, well, what if he's indicted? You don't want to say, oh, yeah, I don't care. You say, yeah, that would affect me. I'm telling you right now that the American people don't like this. It damages the nature of our justice system in general because he's only surviving because of his money. The argument is, it has been for a while by many groups in this country, especially minority groups, that this is the kind of hand that's wielded against you and you have no hope if you have no money.
Those polls all ask the question, would you be less likely to vote for Trump if he's convicted? I'd like to see a poll ask, would you be more likely to vote for Trump if he's acquitted? Because if he gets acquitted in this case, it colors the view of all of these prosecutions. It validates what he has been saying, that this is a legal witch hunt, a legal effort to destroy him and interfere in the election. If he gets acquitted in this, it's a huge political win for him.
Mark Thiessen for Attorney General.
All right, now turning to the current president. Just a short time ago, President Biden finally says that he will debate President Trump. Details next. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.